Stephen Warner on the Barton organ. Now, Stephen, you must tell us what that was. Sundance by Bob Chilcott. Wonderful. Welcome to the Penny Stamps Distinguished Speaker Series. My name is Christina Hamilton, the series director. Today we present something a little different, a rumination on the life and work of Robert Mapplethorpe and an exploration of creative process, a great part of our season theme turn as we can see how influencers and ideas beget ideas. Our creative process folks, stars of the day, are composer Bryce Dessner and librettist Korde Arrington Tuttle, the creative team behind Triptych, Eyes of One on Another, which is a University Musical Society co-commission, which will have its world premiere right here in Ann Arbor tomorrow night and Saturday night at the Power Center, just around the corner. So a big thank you to our partner today, the University Musical Society, and we thank them for their fortitude, for making University of Michigan and Ann Arbor really a center for the vital fabric of culture building. And we wish them continued success, many more commissions to come. And so to support their innovative efforts, you need to make sure to get your tickets to many of the incredible offerings yet to come in this season. You can visit ums.org to get tickets. And if you do not yet have tickets to the world premiere of Triptych, there are a few seats left, so do not delay. You have 2 chances to see it tomorrow evening and Saturday evening, 8 p.m. at the Power Center, ums.org. For all the students, remember, you get student price tickets, so get them while you can. Just one announcement today, the U of M student group, International Youth and Students for Social Equality, they're holding a meeting this evening at the Michigan League, 7 p.m. They are holding this meeting, they're calling for the immediate release of Chelsea Manning, who was imprisoned last Friday. Many of you were here, I'm sure, for her talk in the series just last year, which was actually 1 year ago today. Again, if you're interested, you can join that meeting and get more information. That's at 7 p.m. tonight at the Michigan League. A note to all here today, the subject matter and images may be a little uncomfortable for some, certainly unsuitable for children. There will be some extreme sexual content, so beware, be warned. Oh, I think you can handle it. Please do remember to turn off your cell phones. There will be a Q&A right here in the main theater at the end. You'll see there's microphones here at the ends of these 2 aisles. So if you have a question, you'll have time to ask it. Today's format will be a conversation as evidenced by the furniture on the stage. And we have a veritable bevy of talent here for the stage. So just a few brief words of introduction on each of our illustrious members of the cast of characters today. First, we have the instigator of Triptych, as it is the brainchild of Bryce Dessner. Bryce is one of the most sought-after composers of his generation, with a rapidly expanding catalog of works commissioned by leading ensembles. Known to many as a guitarist for the band The National, he is also active as a curator in the realm of new creative music. His orchestral, chamber, and vocal compositions have been commissioned by the Los Angeles Philharmonic, Kronos Quartet, BAM Next Wave Festival, Barbican Center, Edinburgh International Festival, Sydney Festival, 8th Blackbird, New York City Ballet, and on and on and on. Librettist of Triptych, Korde Arrington Tuttle, is an award-winning playwright, poet, and visual artist. He is a 2018 recipient of the New York Stage and Film Company Founders Award, the 2018 Jody Falco and Jeffrey Steinman Commission for Emerging Playwrights Award at Playwrights Horizons, and the 2018 Playwrights Initiative Fellowship at the Gerasi Resident Artist Program. And to lead them in conversation today, we have Netta Ulaby. She is an arts and culture correspondent for National Public Radio. You may have heard her. She has reported and produced a wide range of news and feature stories, from school shootings to disaster relief to profiling an eclectic mix of entertainers. She won the 2010 Gracie Award for her work on the NPR podcast Culturetopia, and twice received University of Southern California Annenberg Getty Arts Journalism Fellowship. So you are in good hands. Perhaps our central character, though only appearing posthumously today, Robert Mapplethorpe himself. Robert Mapplethorpe was an American photographer known for his sensitive yet blunt treatment of controversial subjects in large-scale, highly stylized black and white photographs. His work featured an array of subjects including celebrity portraits, nudes, self-portraits, and flowers. His most controversial work is that of the S&M Underground of the late 60s and 70s in New York City. The homoeroticism of this work fueled a national debate over the public funding of artwork. Mapplethorpe died of AIDS on March 9th, 1989, just over 30 years ago, just before The Perfect Moment, an exhibition of 175 of his photographs, which would ignite a controversy across the nation. It cast a spotlight on Cincinnati, where for the first time in the United States, criminal charges were levied against a museum director, and a young Bryce Dessner was witness to the ensuing drama. We're going to begin now. We're going to take a few moments to just view of some of Mapplethorpe's work. We'll look at that together, and then I'll welcome everyone to the stage. Please welcome to the stage Netta Yalabi, Bryce Dessner, and Korde Arrington Tuttle.
You know, I was told before coming that not everybody here necessarily is going to know a lot about Robert Mapplethorpe, and I was going to ask if this was indeed anyone's first introduction to his work right now, but I can't see any of you. So I'm just going to assume that some people, yes, some people no. And right now, congratulations to both of you. This is tremendously exciting. I know it's exciting for you. It's also very, very exciting for us to get to be here. And just as we were looking at these images, it made me wonder, when you were working on the opera, how do you cull down? Mapplethorpe died when he was far too young. He died of HIV-related causes in, I believe, '89. Is that right? But he left behind such an extraordinary body of work. How did you keep them in your head? Were there specific images that guided your composition and your libretto?
Yes. Thank you. And also, hello. How are y'all feeling? Good, good. I also just want to open this up because it is a conversation amongst all of us. So hello and welcome. Yeah, for me, I love thinking about food. I love thinking about crock pots. So I feel like for me, the process of working on the libretto and creating the piece, both structurally and the specific content and subject matter, had to do with tossing a lot of images in the crock pot, putting the trial in the crock pot, placing my questions in the crock pot, trying to unearth contradictions, placing all of that in the crock pot, and then because of, in part, the speed with which we needed to create, there was a lot of there are a lot of moving parts, which is really exciting. And for me, as an intentional person, I like to take my time. I'm also a slow person, so there was something about then having a limited amount of time to take everything out of the crock pot and synthesize that information and arrange it, or attempt to arrange it in a way that is legible. So that's how I would answer that question.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I think that's a good question. There are so many images, and there's images, a couple of which you just saw, which are, stand out as when you're dealing with Mapplethorpe. There's this question around, do you deal with the seven images from the obscenity trial in Cincinnati, which technically the foundation is very sensitive about showing. For me, I think I spent a lot of time with all the images. The Getty Institute in Los Angeles houses the Mapplethorpe archive, and there's the images that you can find that have been in exhibitions or are in books or on their website, and then there's 1,000 times that. His archives are extensive, and because he knew he was dying, he was meticulous about organizing it all. So it's quite beautiful to visit those archives. If he didn't himself publish a photo, we're not technically allowed to show it, but we spent a lot of time with, seeing his negatives, seeing boxes of porn that he collected, seeing boxes of, Polaroids he had taken, images that no one's ever seen. So that was a really kind of, in terms of stitching together kind of fabric of his mind and, what he was inspired by, that really helped. I think, for me, I've been through phases. We've been thinking about this long enough that I've been through phases of, and his catalog is so vast. And there's sort of parts of it that we didn't even know existed. There's lots of, the images of Mapplethorpe that are known are quite a limited selection of what he shot, which is far more vast and broad. I think specifically for me, some of the self-portraits, you saw one of them there of him with his cane and the skull. There's the one with the knife, which is directly based on a Caravaggio painting. There's an image of him sitting at the Whitney for his, what would become the Perfect Moment exhibition, kind of his last, his big crowning achievement in New York when he was, had 6 months before it's a very operatic moment, actually. There's a beautiful Vanity Fair review of the show at the Whitney, his last show. And he's sitting there in his wheelchair, kind of basking in his fame and achievement, but he's visibly very, very sick. And so there was images like that really kind of affected me, and also thinking about kind of the challenge of writing a piece based on someone else's work is a big challenge. And the photos themselves he didn't mean them to exist in this kind of narrative. They have profound, every one of those images kind of tells a story, but it's not necessarily the same story. So yeah, I think that said, also I would say, for me, the minute Korde entered the process, he brought, you immediately brought with you, I think, a beautiful collection of images that so his first version of the libretto came with a collection of 40 images that were carefully selected, and that for me was like, oh wow, there it is. So we departed from there.
This was one of them.
Yeah. What's the story with this one?
Well, actually, briefly, if you don't mind, I want to jump back for one moment. That Vanity Fair, while the review, that moment actually makes me sad when I look at that image. There's so much to celebrate in that image, but to me, that image does not convey a celebration of life. It felt like a memorial of sorts, which it was, but before its time, it didn't quite feel like the living funeral that it could have been, or might have been, rather. But so much is wrapped up in that moment, for sure. This particular image to me is representative of what Bryce just described, actually, which was spending time with the archive and getting into images and corners of Mapplethorpe's mind that I had never seen, that I didn't know existed. And for me, Mapplethorpe is not someone who, growing up, I found to be synonymous with both black women and gender nonconforming, and folks who identify as gender nonconforming. So there was so much there that I thought, what does it mean that generally we have been kind of barred access to all that Mapplethorpe saw, which connects to, I think, larger institutional conversations. But for me, it's something to celebrate.
I really want to ask you about the Mapplethorpe you discovered in the archive, but let's be chronological. My understanding is that the two of you discovered Mapplethorpe, or were introduced to Mapplethorpe very differently. And Bryce, we know you were in Cincinnati during that museum show. Was that the first time you'd heard of Robert Mapplethorpe? You were a teenager. Did you go to see the show?
I heard about the show when they shut it down, and it was, being a child of the 80s and, the Reagan years, and for me, it was kind of like a light went on suddenly, where it just suddenly, those moments where suddenly the scene changes and you start to see things a little more clearly. And I think at age 14 also, so it was like a lightning bolt moment, and it's still, the city is still recovering, to be honest. It really, the irony of this project is I actually suggested it to a composer friend of mine who had a commission in Cincinnati 6 or 7 years ago, and I was involved in commissioning him, and he was like, what should I do? I was like, I think you should do Mapplethorpe. And he proposed it, and then everyone was like, no way, and I realized—
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and I realized that, wow, this is still such a controversial, difficult subject. And I think it's just, his work gets deep into the heart of all kinds of issues around our identity and how we see one another. And the images are so powerful, and his art is so powerful in that way. And the kind of, the conflict within it is still always unfolding. And so that's when I realized I have to do something with this. But yeah, as a teenager, I knew about Picasso and I knew about Mapplethorpe, literally. I think for me, he was a major figure. And I went on, then 4 years later, went on to college and was able to discover the images and kind of kept, understanding also, at that time, learning about the AIDS epidemic and learning about, what did censorship mean. And the trial itself took place in municipal court at which is the lowest court. But they were talking about, what is art? And these so if you read the transcripts, are fascinating, actually. And for years after, I would meet, eventually when I met, Michael Stipe or Patti Smith or Philip Glass or these, important artists who were, at least Philip, obviously Patti was very, very close with Mapplethorpe, and, Philip was as well. And to hear, the minute you say Cincinnati, and that's what they ask you about. So it's kind of it was this interesting, cloud over the city. The Contemporary Art Center, years later, asked me to get involved in running and kind of producing some events there, and I started a music festival called Music Now, partly again with this idea that I wanted to give back to the cultural energy and kind of health of the city. And so that festival is now in its 16th year, so it's been running for quite some time. And but this is really, the idea is at age 14, I was not allowed to look at the pictures, and now I'm looking at the pictures, and Korde and I are doing it together.
And Korde, you were born the year Mapplethorpe died. How did you learn about Robert Mapplethorpe?
I was actually born the year after Mapplethorpe died.
Sorry.
Yes. I came to Mapplethorpe's work, life and work, in college. through very different means. I mean, I've always been really interested in art and art history, but I would say actually it was more my interest in, I've been reflecting a lot this week, and also being here on this college campus has brought a lot back and is bringing a lot back, thinking about to those years. And for me, it had something to do with how he saw. It had something to do with precision. It had something to do with an attempt at trying to grasp at what he describes as perfection, but also a kind of transcendent beauty, and a kind of love that might not look like love, or might not look how I'm used to perceiving love, or tenderness, or all of that. So I couldn't articulate that then, and I think I'm coming into that now a little bit, but for me, it's poetry, I think. So poetry is my background, and I love words, I love poetry, but I also love visual poetry. And there's something about like I grew up in the South, largely in the Carolinas, in North Carolina, in a conservative evangelical Christian household, Pentecostal home. So religion, religious iconography, like all of that very much informed my upbringing and my conditioning. Sexuality, censorship, all of that informed my sense of self, and coming into my sense of self. So there's something about Mapplethorpe's, the way he captured and crystallized for me something that I could feel but couldn't quite articulate. And I'm actually going to go to an image that initially challenged me in a way that at 18, I was upset by and confused by, and now appreciate.
There's no shortage of disturbing Mapplethorpe images.
Not at all. Actually, it is not. It's not in this selection, so I'll show you something else.
You can also describe the one that did bug you.
That wasn't what I was going to show you, but I feel like it feels like related to what I wanted to show you. It was actually the Upside-Down Crucifix, constructed with two male models, with two people, and there's something about, for me, there's something with coming to terms with and spending time intimately with discomfort, and placing myself inside of that discomfort, like actually imagining like allowing myself to imagine and spend time with what I was told was wrong, and what does it mean that if what I was told was wrong or incorrect, just deeply, it just doesn't align with how I feel, or how, so there was a lot of just provocation that was not empty provocation. It was provocation that asked me and required my presence, and so I think that presence, I'm like getting there. I think that presence has asked me to interrogate my past, interrogate my history, interrogate my relationship to sexuality and family and religion in ways that feel useful and not just.
Yeah. I was curious the extent to which discomfort was a part of the process in creating this work for both of you.
I think for all, 30 of us at different times in the process, there's been intense discomfort and reckoning, and almost every day actually we'll have a discussion or confront something new in terms of any number. Now that the work, there's the images, but then there's the bigger work of what this is. And I think in a way for me the piece has become the process of making the piece. And actually the relationships that we've all been able to develop, my primary relationship is with Korde, and we've had from day one just a beautiful open dialogue with each other, coming from extremely different backgrounds and different generations and a different doorway into the work. And to have that exchange and to be able to participate in that discomfort and that beauty is such an incredible gift. So it's that this relationship is far more meaningful to me than the work itself. It is the work itself. And in that way, if Mapplethorpe gifted us that, then that it's a beautiful kind of outcome of this process. But it is it speaks to the power of his work, hopefully to the power of our work, that, every day I'll have a conversation with a singer or, one of the designers or the director or something where we're constantly confronting various issues. And, from where I'm standing as a 40-year-old, straight white man from the Midwest, coming into Mapplethorpe, I had to spend a lot of time reckoning with myself and finding my main doorway was a love and appreciation for the beauty of the images. And thinking about, it takes my breath away. Many of the images are just, especially when it's beautiful to see them in this, as opposed to seeing them printed. There's something very special about being in the theatrical setting, we're looking at you, looking at that image. They're moving. I thought we were going to stay with the...
Do you want to go back?
To ass eating? I was happy it was there.
I'm never mad about a little ass eating.
It was a more dramatic background for my...
Yeah.
We don't get to control this in the show, so we're really enjoying it.
I'm having a lot of fun and on my worst behavior, if you can't tell.
The piece could have been this, just you and I talking and...
Actually, yeah. No, but
I kind of hope it is. I hope that when we see it, there's going to be a little bit of the dynamic of the two of you in communication together. Yeah. There's got to be, right?
I think so. Also, Bryce, thank you for what you just said. I feel similarly, and for me, the entry point of love, I feel like part of what has been exciting about this, not just collaboration, but the relationship that we're developing, is that inside of that love, I feel like we've also wrestled. I feel like the interrogation, the personal work, love encompasses that, which is not always warm, which is not always inviting. It's work. It's work.
How did you end up interrogating an artist as a racy? And I use that term in as many meanings as you want to apply to it, as Mapplethorpe was. How did you critique what he did? What was your analysis? How did you frame how racial dynamics play out in his work?
That's a great segue to poetry. Y'all mind if I read a little poetry? Do you mind? Okay, so I'm going to share two poems with you. One, a Rilke poem, and then another by Essex Hemphill, who is the poet that we've placed in conversation with Robert. Well, he placed himself in conversation with Robert. I want to be clear about that. One of the poems that's in the piece. So Essex Hemphill was a black, gay, activist, poet, writer, performer, everything. And wrote a poem critical of, he wrote an unpublished poem critical of Robert Mapplethorpe, specifically regarding the objectification of the black body and the black male form and the black nude form. And so for me, before I read, and even in resurrecting and thinking about resurrecting Mapplethorpe in 2019, especially, but not even especially, because I feel like it is the work of all of us, but especially as a black queer identified person, I actually was not able to, and maybe we'll get there, but I was not able to dive into the process without allowing the inspiration and the provocation and the admiration to coexist alongside accountability and criticism and a thoughtful kind of interrogation that's not always kind or easy, but is loving. And so Essex was for me a way into what wrestling looks like. So the dynamics that are taking place in the work and are also the real dynamics, because this is America, and while a lot has changed, ultimately what's changed. So some conversations can easily slip into territory that is easily triggering, or easily brings up things that might not actually be how you feel, but are how we're conditioned, or it might be how you feel, and let's have that conversation because it's important. So I do hope that for those of you who are able to join us this weekend, we invite you into a space of interiority where collectively we will lean into discomfort and do so with care. So I'm just going to read a couple of pieces, and This particular,
That good?
thank you. Actually, let's go to, should we do let's do that one. Actually, let's do this one. I love this image. So this poem is titled, Archaic Torso of Apollo. We never knew his stupendous head in which the eye apples ripened, but his torso still glows like a lamp in which his gaze, screwed back to low, holds steady and gleams. Otherwise, the curve of his chest couldn't dazzle you, nor a smile run through the slight twist of the loins toward the center that held procreation. Otherwise, this stone would stand mutilated and too short below the translucent fall-off of the shoulders, and wouldn't shimmer like a predator's fur, nor shine out past all its edges like a star, for in it is no place that doesn't see you. You must change your life.
You know, it almost feels like that could have been written specifically about Mapplethorpe, but also about Caravaggio, who, of course, was
Truly
one of his great influences. Before you switch to the other poem, can I just ask you, how is the opera structured? What, does it tell a story? Is it impressionistic? How does it work?
That's a beautiful question. And so even thinking about the archaic torso of Apollo and thinking about classicism and thinking about Mapplethorpe's inspiration, or much of what inspired him, and the classical work, and also what has inspired me, and also some of what has inspired Bryce and some of the music. And you'll see that actually, you'll experience that throughout the piece, but especially at the top in thinking about origin stories and thinking about historical and social and emotional context. And thinking about statues and sculpture and also the body, thinking about all of those relationships. So the piece is structured, or inspired by, rather, Mapplethorpe's XYZ portfolio, X being his exploration of homosexual, homoerotic, S&M, sadomasochistic imagery. And I've also included meditations on religion and religious iconography because they are related. And then why? Flowers, his portfolio featuring flowers. And I also was inspired in thinking about flowers, also in thinking about the trial. And Bryce was really instrumental in thinking, and forging for me, conceptually, the relationship between flowers and the trial. And then Z being a meditation on new black men and the black body. And yes.
Can we hear the other poem I'm such a sucker for?
We may hear the other poem, yes.
And then after that, we're going to play a little music from the...
Beautiful.
Yeah.
And now, Bryce, I want to go back to that image that you selected before. Okay. So this is an Essex poem. It's entitled Black Beans. Times are lean, pretty baby. The beans are burnt to the bottom of the battered pot. Let's make fierce love on the overstuffed hand-me-down sofa. We can burn it up, too. Our hungers will evaporate like money. I smell your lust, not the pot burnt black with tonight's meager meal. So we can't buy flowers for our table. Our kisses are petals. Our tongues caress the bloom. Who dares to tell us we are poor and powerless? We keep treasure any king would count as dear. Come on, pretty baby. Our souls can't be crushed like cats crossing streets too soon. Let the beans burn all night long. Our chipped water glasses are filled with wine from our loving. And the burnt black beans, caviar.
That's beautiful. Yeah.
It's beautiful. It's a beautiful poem.
I am probably too literal, but it also makes me appreciate the crock pot analogy a little bit.
Yes,
better,
crock pot. Yeah, full circle.
Bryce, what did you put in the crock pot? What were you drawing from? What aesthetic influences and musical influences were you putting together?
I think that once I had the libretto, so Korde and I went back and forth a lot, and as he said, the first section, X explores on some level kind of the entryway. That's where Patti Smith also, you hear kind of reimagining of an Italian Mannerist madrigal, which is, I think, probably the first thing. I did spend quite a lot of time in Mapplethorpe's, in the things you can find. He didn't say or write a ton. That would go back to the archive. There's beautiful letters between him and Patti and Sam Wagstaff, but he definitely, very concretely was interested in this Italian Renaissance art and kind of classicism, and so there's, working with Roomful of Teeth, who are the 8 singer. We have 10 amazing soloists who are the show. Roomful of Teeth, and then Alicia Hall Moran and Isaiah Robinson. And so the tradition of Italian madrigal, in many ways, is kind of a perfect analog for some of the images. And so I had been thinking about it for a long time, that I wanted to do something with it. It's also just some of the most beautiful music ever written. It's also the first time that vocal music, the first significant tradition that kind of developed outside of the church. So it's secular, polyphonic vocal writing from the 15th and 16th century, Monteverdi being and Gesualdo being kind of the most famous versions of this. There's also like a big tradition of erotic madrigals. So our piece starts with a kind of hybrid remix or something of a piece called Sestina that Monteverdi actually wrote when he was writing the Orfeo, which is his kind of most famous piece, and the lead role was a young woman who died of the plague or something, and so the Sestina is the title is "Weeping at the Tomb of the Beloved," and the words read like Patti Smith could have written them for Robert, actually. And so we go from that into The Boy Who Loved Michelangelo. So that moment is sort of one of the first musical things I had in mind. From there I would say that, when I read Korde's libretto, just the music of there were rhythms in his words, there were melodies in his words, it's incredibly musical and poetic and imaginative writing. And so that I allowed myself to kind of fully commit and kind of inhabit him and his voice. For instance, there's a section in the middle section, which is based on the trial on flowers. There's a piece called What Haunts. What haunts makes love, what haunts has AIDS. When I read that, I thought St. John's Passion. It felt, I could hear it being sung in that way, and it's just profoundly moving and beautiful. There's another section in the trial which begins cases and counties, and I heard that kind of like cases and counties, like being sung in a kind of American folk way. There's a reimagined gospel song in the third section that Korde took a very famous "I'd Rather Have Jesus," and he changed the words. He took out some words, yeah.
Which I guess is changing.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry, Mom.
Yeah. But I really, literally got this book and opened it, and I'm like, okay, right. So how do, but I was like, I think I'm just going to go for it. And so I then adapted, and it's something I love doing, actually, because obviously, songs are really important to me, and I'm someone who's not purely existing in the classical tradition, where I come, I write songs and I have classical training, and I've done work before with kind of American idioms and vernacular, and so it was really exciting to incorporate some of that into the piece. So the piece begins in this kind of ornate Mannerist classical way, and then it ventures through American folk music and through gospel and through more dissonant kind of word painting, where I'm really studying the text in a more classical way, and then so it kind of makes a trip, and then to be working with singers who are so versatile, and they're kind of like a lexicon of different singing styles. So we're able to really touch on they can sing the same phrase 20 different ways. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say also too that Bryce's adherence to and time spent with the words was truly such a gift. And I've said this to you before, but I want to publicly acknowledge what a gift it was. The first time before even hearing it aloud, the first time reading it, and I don't read music particularly well. I did grow up in choir. But even the first time just seeing what Bryce had written, I just was like crying. And then the first time I heard it out loud at Mass Mocha, our first public workshop, I just wept. I was sitting between Mary and Bryce, just like. So, yeah. Just want to say that.
Thank you.
How did you two find each other?
I think that's the answer.
I think actually my publisher, who's this amazing woman named Jill Graham, she's a Scottish, just brilliant woman, and she found some of your poetry and called me. It was like, this is unbelievable writing, and that's how we found each other. I think I can thank Jill for, I was literally like, I read your words before I met you. Yeah.
And I also want to thank, I feel like just relationships are always, I'm finding relationships are really how so many of these things happen. And I do know that one person who was integral in passing my work along, even in conversations around this project, was an incredible performer, writer, director, multi-hyphenate human named Daniel Alexander Jones. And if you don't know who he is, just take a quick little gander at Instagram or Google, but is working at the front lines, I think, of Black queer liberation in really beautiful ways.
Would you mind setting up the piece of music that we have? Korde, I know you know what it is. I'm not sure if you do, Bryce.
Yeah, American Wedding.
Yeah, so we just heard a poem that Korde read of Essex Hemphill, who, again, there's many things about this piece that I love. I think Essex's presence in the piece is, I would say, even more important to me than even Mapplethorpe. Yeah, having spent time with his words, it's just such a profoundly beautiful artist. So, and you know, as Korde mentioned, he was in his lifetime, he was critical of Mapplethorpe's depiction of African American men, of the black body. That we found in his archive an unpublished poem that was for Robert Mapplethorpe as the title, and it's a really it's not a I wouldn't call it a hard-edged criticism. It's a beautiful poetic query of the work that is both respectful and really interrogating. And I think, you know, the line for me, the kind of one of the thesis of this work that we can take away. There's so the beginning of the third section has this poem for Robert Mapplethorpe that we've set to music, and it opens then, you know, kind of a door that Korde walks through and takes us through on a journey. Which the third section of the work begins with for Robert Mapplethorpe, and then it ends with the piece you're about to hear. We're going to hear part of, I think, called American Wedding. American Wedding is I'm not a Hemphill scholar. Are there any in the room?
Did I hear a whisper? Are there any Hemphill scholars in the room?
We're asking this to get off the hook if we say something incorrect.
Basically, yeah.
American Wedding is one of his best-known poems, one of his masterpieces, and it was a poem that, actually, it was a title of the work before Triptych. We were thinking about that. It wasn't in the piece until very late, actually, and that was partly me. I was kind of circling it out of respect for the work. You know, to put we call it 3-1 is the where it sits in the piece. He wrote that directly to Mapplethorpe, so it felt suited, and also for us it was the right doorway for us to walk through. To end with American Wedding, it came to us late in the process, and actually for me, I knew that Korde was open to it, but it was again musical. I was just sitting. We had done a reading in Paris in the fall, and I had a recording of it, and the piece ended with the previous section, and I was just listening to it, and then I was just reading American Wedding, and finally the music kind of presented itself to me, which I wasn't sure how it could be sung. And actually so the piece goes through these different styles of singing, and it's circuitous,
Yes.
kind of in this, it's slippery, and it, but there was a kind of full-hearted, a simpler kind of singing that we didn't have. And so I decided to write this piece in a much more, where the singers can really let loose. And it became a kind of like a big moment. So that's what I can say about American Wedding. And do you want to say something about what the poem says? Or shall we just?
I think we should just dive into it, but I will say just in conversation with that and alongside that, I would say one of the things I'm most excited about this work is Essex in his own words, is actually Essex's voice and Essex's presence. Because I don't know, actually, in my research, I don't know that Robert ever responded to Essex or his critique, his queries. I don't know that it ever happened. So there's something about introducing the beginning of that first section with, right, Essex, as Bryce said, directly addressing Robert, and then at the end, Essex, as I've interpreted it, or as I'm one of the many interpretations, but Essex then moving away from speaking to Robert and actually addressing himself and his own community in this kind of love letter that feels personal in a different way.
Yeah, I forgot to mention when I said thesis, there's a line in the For Robert Mapplethorpe poem where he's talking about the pictures.
Oh, when we went to music, I took an image off, but do we want to?
No, that's okay, yeah.
Okay.
Where he says, is it desire, disgust, equality, or hatred? And the answer is that it's all of those things. But yeah, that's kind of the center of that first poem. And so we'll hear a little bit of American Wedding. This is in the piece has changed a bit, so you're hearing a version. The version tomorrow night will be different.
Yes. Lance, thank you. Y'all, can we just give a round of applause for Lance, the sound and tech? Thank you.
I place my ring on your cock, where it belongs, where it belongs. In America, I place my ring on your cock, where it belongs, where it belongs. In America, I place my ring on your cock, where it belongs, where it belongs. In America, I place my ring on your cock, where it belongs, where it belongs. In America, I place my ring on your cock, where it belongs.
Sounds like a
It's also like an
rehearsal.
eight. It's an experience. The full. Should we cut before the verse?
Yeah.
Or the,
In America, I place my ring on your cock, where it belongs, where it belongs.
wish we got to hear more of it.
I'm not sure where that recording comes from, but the laughing was.
It was. I thought it was Mass Mocha.
No, I think it's a rehearsal. It's okay, yeah.
This particular performance that many of us are going to see this weekend is Roomful of Teeth, and if you're a New Yorker reader in the audience, you may have read a recent glowing profile of this musical ensemble. I think we're hearing just a little bit of their talents in this. What did they bring to this particular performance? And they're so singular as a group. How are you going to do it without them?
How would we do it without them? I think they're going to always be there. So yeah, we don't have to do it without them. But they're really like a band. You know, they bring. I work with all kinds of orchestras and classical ensembles and string quartets, and I've worked with choral groups before. Roomful, they bring a kind of intent where they can't just sing something. They have to know why they're singing it, and they've been quite involved in shaping the work. And you know, sometimes in uncomfortable ways that I've had, you know, as a composer, I've had to be very open to their feedback. But I think it's made us all stronger and made the piece much stronger. You know, there's the notes on the page, and anytime you work, part of what really drives me to write music in this way is the collaborative. You know, but also this coming with a score. For instance, last night we heard the Philharmonia perform here with Esa-Pekka Salonen, and they're playing music that is 120 years old, but they have a beautiful document in front of them, which is the composer's score, that allows them to quickly get into really deep human collaboration. And so that's what is exciting about working with notated music and you know, classically trained performers, is you can get pretty deep pretty quickly. Now with Roomful, it's like beyond deep. You're like in the deep depths of the sea, really. It plunges profound. And so they've brought, all kinds of technique to the piece and suggestion. You'll hear lots of interesting vocal technique and different types of singing that even for me I discovered by working with them. So it's been a beautiful process. And I think one thing I can say, I talked about the kind of classical singing that is very much in my score. I think that there's also, you know, with the way Mapplethorpe is mixing the sacred and the profane and like elevating images that some people might call pornographic but are actually great works of art and so perfectly shot. The Roomful and Isaiah and Alicia are bringing all kinds of grit and edge to the work, and that you know, and the singing really brings that in.
Like, what is a technique? What is an example of something that they brought?
I mean, they just in the way they're able to kind of open and close vowel sounds. Bringing the voice from the chest to the head and into the bowels, and you know, you'll hear they're able to kind of start from into the most beautiful tone you've ever heard in a matter of seconds. Things like that, which are just, I think it's in the spirit of mannerism. It's deep down, you know, 200 years, 400 years post Monteverdi, but in that, I think he would have really liked it.
And also in the spirit of allowing everything to coexist, I think too. Just putting it all in the crock pot together, and what does that taste like, you know? I mean, 250 years is a long time to marinate.
How did you guys handle the images? Do we see the work in the show?
Yes.
Yeah, we're both excited because there's some images we're showing actually here that we didn't know we were showing that we technically aren't in the show, but that we have an incredible team. So Kaneza Shaw, who is our director, Carlos Soto, who's a designer. We have a huge group of, you know, I don't even know, are we 10, are we 15 in terms of the creative team behind it, but we've really had a lot of help. And we've, you know, the version we're showing tomorrow night is the fourth staging of it. It's been in various stages of kind of workshop and process. So, and each one has had almost entirely different, it's starting to settle now. So, yeah, it's been experimenting with images and having a lot of feedback from people who have just amazing sense of visual design. Yeah.
And I'm right, am I not, that this is the first time the Mapplethorpe estate has given permission for his work to be turned into something other than a photography exhibition? Is that right?
As far as I know, that is what, yeah, I was the first one to go into the foundation and ask, and was excited when they said yes, and they said that they had not done it before. I think maybe they've been used in a limited way, but this is definitely, so it's quite exciting.
Yeah, I'm not sure when I think about documentary work and film, but I'm not sure in terms of like a theatrical context. I don't think that has happened. Yeah.
How has, as people who've been so immersed in the world of Robert Mapplethorpe and his photography for so long, how has your relationship with him and his art changed over the course of working on this opera?
I think I'll go back to what I said at the beginning, which is that my knowledge of his work was very limited to some of the, I think it's another side of this is there's the kind of sensationalism that probably began with the obscenity trial and the censorship, and him, becoming known for bullwhip or for fisting or for certain images that are
or for black dick.
Yeah.
Let's just talk about it.
Yeah. That there's this kind of sensational, it's a little bit, which I think also puts a kind of expectation on the show, which is something that we've had to wrestle with, and an expectation on the music that I haven't necessarily felt the need to make sensational music that's trying to rise to that. And I think the thing that Korde and I have talked about is that in experiencing his archive and getting deeper into the research, to see the broader picture of his output has been what's really been quite beautiful, to spend time with images that we didn't know existed. So just to have a deeper understanding. And I hope I think this show will open some windows into that for people who are curious about Mapplethorpe, and maybe will see images that you really haven't seen before.
Personally, wrestling with and spending time with the images and with Robert and his legacy, I will include Essex in that, because for me, for this process, they're very much interwoven. I would say that my journey working on this piece has also accompanied a personal journey of self-discovery and self-love in kind of emerging adulthood. So for me, there's something about there's something actually about, even in thinking about Z, even thinking about how Robert's depiction of black men, or his series, his Z series, there's something about existing within the confines of whiteness. There's something about, as a black queer man, existing within that frame, and then actually meaningfully sitting there long enough, because I don't ever feel comfortable speaking in front of people, creating a piece of work, doing without emotional truthfulness. And so for me, I had to be emotionally truthful about what it means to exist inside of that frame, and then also remove that frame. And then what does that kind of liberation look, feel, taste like, smell like, and engage all of my senses in trying to understand that personal journey? Because I couldn't write the piece without doing that alongside it, or doing that first. So for me, it's all of that. So because I was not born in America, but because I have American parents and I do live in America and was raised in America primarily, that frame, I can't actually escape that frame. So what does that look like for myself? What might it look like for the models who sat for Robert, for some of his lovers? So for me, spending time with Robert has also been about interrogating sense of self in this moment in time.
I'm so grateful to have learned, I think, just in the course of this conversation, how central Essex Hemphill was in your creative process in putting this together, and how in some senses they were already in conversation, and it was excavating a conversation and putting it in different dimensions. And when you talk about resurrecting Robert Mapplethorpe for 2019, it seems like what you're doing is you're bringing up also a conversation that's incredibly timely, that's timeless, and giving it this kind of voice. Something else I wanted to ask you guys, and then I'd like to turn things over to the audience, was, Mapplethorpe was so shocking when you were 14 years old. I mean, now so many of the images that were, seemed unbelievably transgressive in 1980 are now, we could be 2 clicks away from them on the internet. How does his work for us right now at this cultural moment where images like these are, where his images are practically tame compared to what you can find so easily?
Yeah, I mean, they're not that tame, but they're, but it's true that, where you have teenagers who are definitely a click away from whatever kind of porn they want to look at. I would say 2 things. One,
and not teenagers.
Yeah, but like the beauty of the images and the intent behind it and the art of it is more apparent. That the time spent with these images and that becomes even more profound to me. The other thing I would say that we've discovered in this process that I've discovered, I know we've talked about, is the tangible sense of, especially in some of the S&M images, which are primarily on white male bodies, there is a tangible feeling of consent in those images that I think is something that is significant. Yeah, that's something that we've talked about.
When I also think about sensationalism and think about the perception of the kind of transgressive perception of the work, there's something about that like a one-to-one kind of experience with the computer screen or with an image, and then when that's expanded and we're sharing space with folks, and when I think about what certain images might arise collectively or personally, to me it's doing something a little bit different. The communal experience of holding space for all of that together within the kind of framework of the structure that we've created, I think, to me, feels a little bit, we're attempting to do something different than, I think, what is often written, like done around his work.
Right. I think you said something to me earlier about the difference between a culture of immediate gratification, which it sometimes feels like we're just hopelessly trapped inside, and what Mapplethorpe was doing. His intentions were completely different.
Intention.
Do we have questions from the audience? I'm sure we do. There's microphones there and there. Oh, hello.
Hi. Thank you so much for this extremely rich and provocative conversation. Neda Ulabi used the term opera several times to describe a triptych, but that is a word that neither one of you used. So I was wondering, I found it useful because I actually didn't really, I don't know what triptych was. I mean, it's vague to me.
Oh, wait, I'm sorry. Would you mind holding on for one moment? Please, what is your name, please, one more time?
Hi, I'm Larry.
Hi, Larry. Hey, y'all. For those of you who are exiting, Larry has a really beautiful question. Would you mind doing so quietly? And thank you for coming. Thank you.
Thanks, Korde. So Neda used the word opera to refer to triptych, which will be performed tomorrow and Saturday, but you guys did not use that word. So I was wondering if that's a useful word or if there's different words that you use to envision what will happen tomorrow and Saturday at the Power Center.
I think Larry's asking if I messed up.
No, not at all.
It's a great question.
Our director, Kaneza, uses opera also. So I think for Korde and I, there wasn't a deliberate decision that we were writing an opera. I think we were, so if it's an opera, it's definitely of a more experimental form. You could also call it a song cycle or an oratorio. The opera brings with it all kinds of classical baggage, which can be helpful or unhelpful. I think specifically would mean a very clear narrative line, which our piece does not have. I would say that it's not necessarily a kind of clear narrative, although parts of it do have story. Yeah.
I would say, I agree, except that I would say that opera is useful in thinking about the baggage that you named, because I think part of what I'm interested in doing, or part of what has just happened, is getting to unpack some of that baggage, to unpack some of that kind of history, and also maybe trouble or just interrogate what opera means, its legacy, and how we interpret it or think about what that means now.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. You have a great beard, Larry.
I have a question. My name is Zita Gillis, and this will be the premiere. You've had workshops. Do you foresee that this will continue to morph, to change from performance to performance? Will Friday be different than Saturday? Will next week, Friday in Knoxville, be even different?
Yeah, I think that from definitely a score and the kind of pressures around a new commission, I would say that what we have here at UMS is an unbelievable opportunity to work in a theater for a week and really develop it. The nature of the notes on the page and the, putting music in front of musicians and sometimes getting changes into a score while you're in process is quite difficult. So for me, will it be revised before Knoxville? No. Will it be revised before BAM in June? Definitely. Last night's concert was Bruckner and Schoenberg, and both pieces had many, many revisions. I think the Schoenberg Transfigured Night was written in 1899 as a sextet. Then he arranged it for string orchestra. Then he revised it again in 1943. So, I think that I really respect composers who keep bringing new energy to a piece. And I'm still uncovering. There's sections of the piece, I won't tell you where I'm even considering more significant development. So I think I like the idea that it's a living organism that will keep growing.
Okay.
And actually, Zita, I would argue that it is a different show every night, because while the structure and while what Bryce is saying is true, our brilliant director, Kaneza, she talks a lot about the materials in the room and using the resources and materials in the room. And for me, because as a kind of emotional curator, the audience includes the materials in the room, the interiority that any kind of given audience brings will be a resource that we're using. So energetically, I do feel like it's a different show every time we present it.
Yeah, I'm also wondering if Eighth Blackbird and their versatility may be bringing different expressions of that same note that is on the page.
Eighth Blackbird are an incredible group from Chicago, but they're actually not in this piece, but it's a good idea. Okay. Now that you've said it, we might take, yeah. So it's a Room Full of Teeth is the vocal ensemble, but Eighth Blackbird would sound, it's true.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
We have a question here.
Hi, I'm Andrew. Thank you for coming. I'm really excited to see your piece tomorrow night. I was wondering if you had anything to say about whenever I see Mapplethorpe's work, I know it means a lot of things to a lot of different people, but it's hard for me to kind of divorce the beauty and all these kind of transcendental aesthetics and ideas from the sadness of knowing that there could have been more. And there could have been so much more if like a whole generation of people, and particularly gay men, hadn't been taken from the world so early. I was wondering if you had anything to say about how you grappled with that.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful question, and one that was fundamental to the personal wrestling I was doing, even as I sit with often thinking about queer mentorship and gay mentorship and intergenerational conversations and relationships just within the context of queerness. And with even with Mapplethorpe dying in '89 and Essex Hemphill also dying of AIDS in '95, and me being born right in that moment in time, to me is significant. And Bryce quoted earlier a section from this What Haunts, and for me it was intentional to place What Haunts makes love in the present tense and What Haunts has AIDS in the present tense, and thinking about time, thinking about history, and thinking about what is still alive, that I've directly inherited that legacy. Both in ways that affirm my sense of self and in ways that also terrify me. And I think what you described is laced into this kind of love letter, both for Essex, for Robert, for myself, and for the folks who will be coming to share space with us. And so While, yeah. Thank you for asking that question.
Thank you.
Did you want to say anything to that? Okay.
Thank you.
I also have a profound sadness when I think back at what could have been, but I find it very inspiring that you're creating new beauty from Robert Mapplethorpe. I had the unique experience of working for the Institute of Contemporary Art in Philadelphia, and that was the museum that organized The Perfect Moment. And the night of the opening, we were waiting. We thought Robert Mapplethorpe was going to show up. And it was only that day that we learned that he wouldn't be there. And we knew that he was very, very sick. I just wanted to correct the record slightly for Bryce, that the Whitney show was not The Perfect Moment, that The Perfect Moment was the traveling exhibition. And actually, in the art museum world, what the Whitney did was sort of a no-no because they heard about the ICA exhibition and then they really quickly assembled their own. But to see his works blown up on a screen so huge, I mean, they're just beautiful. And the more beauty we have in the world, the better we need it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions? If not, I really can't think of a more perfect note to end on. Thank you for that so much.
Thank you so much.